There are a couple of items in this display case that are very interesting. This is an old fire bucket, an old leather fire bucket. This came out of Maryland somewhere. I'm not quite sure exactly where, but it was given to the museum to display a number of years ago. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, fire companies quite often used what was called a bucket brigade. And a bucket brigade basically was when they went to a fire, they would identify a water source. It could be a water trough, it could be a well, it could be a creek or anything that from which they could get the water that they needed to fight the fire. And the idea was they would form a bucket brigade from wherever the fire was to wherever the water source was. And you had two lines. One line of people took the buckets down to where the water source, they filled them up, passed them to the next line of people that passed them back to where the fire was. Somebody threw the water on the fire and just repeated the process over and over. These were so important to communities that most communities had ordinances that required homeowners to have a leather bucket. If you owned a mercantile establishment or some type of business, you might be required to have 2 or 3 buckets, or maybe even a dozen according to the size of your business. But they were so important to the community, again, that there were actual city ordinances that required homeowners to have a bucket hanging on their front porch. And it was hung on their front porch so that if you weren't home and somebody was running to the fire, they could grab the bucket off your porch. Now, whether you got it back or not, I don't know, but the fact of the matter was the bucket was available for them to use. There's another item here that's, I think, is very interesting. This is called a fire rattle. Again, the late 1800s, early 1900s, fire was a significant threat to most communities. The reason being that all the buildings were made of wood, everybody heated with a fireplace or some type of wood-burning device, and the buildings were often very closely built together, or close together. So that if you had a single fire could wipe out a whole part of town because of those issues. At night, they would pay somebody to go throughout the town to be on the watch for fire. And if they saw a fire somewhere, they would carry a device like this. If they saw a fire somewhere, they would use it to alert people who were sleeping that you need to get up and go, there's a fire somewhere. This is called a fire rattle, and it's used just like that. These things were made of various sizes, made out of various configurations, but they all did the same thing. They made this loud clacking noise so that if you were asleep in the middle of the night and there was a fire, the person responsible for patrolling at night for fire would use this to wake you up.